The storm had been brewing all afternoon, dark clouds gathering like whispered secrets above our small town. I never imagined that by nightfall, those same storm clouds would mirror the tempest brewing inside my own heart. My name is Sarah, and at 25, I thought I had my life figured out. I was the responsible one, the one who always followed rules, who built walls so high that even I sometimes forgot what lay beyond them. But that night, that one unexpected night, everything I believed about myself, about boundaries, about what was right and wrong, would crumble like sand between trembling fingers. It started innocently enough. My mother had asked me to check on David while she was away visiting my aunt for the weekend. David wasn't just anyone. He was my stepfather, the man who had married my mother 3 years ago when I was away at college. At 42, he was closer to my age than to hers, something that had always created an unspoken tension in our family dynamics. "Just make sure he's eating properly," my mother had said, kissing my cheek before leaving. "You know how he gets. When he's alone, too focused on his work to take care of himself." I nodded, thinking it would be simple. Drop by, check on him, maybe share a meal. What could possibly go wrong? The first drops of rain began falling as I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home. The house looked different somehow, more intimate, more dangerous. Maybe it was just the way the porch light cast long shadows, or how the windows glowed warmly against the darkening sky. David opened the door before I could even knock, as if he'd been watching for me. "Sarah," he said, and something in the way he spoke my name made my heart skip. "Come in. You're getting soaked." He was wearing a simple white t-shirt and dark jeans, his hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. There was something different about him without my mother there. He seemed more relaxed, more himself. "Mom wanted me to check on you," I explained, stepping inside and immediately feeling the warmth of the house wrap around me like an embrace. "Make sure you're not surviving on takeout and coffee." David laughed, a sound I'd heard countless times, but somehow, tonight it seemed to resonate differently, deeper. Guilty as charged. I was just about to order pizza. "Absolutely not," I said, surprising myself with how comfortable I felt taking control. "I'm cooking. It's the least I can do." As I moved toward the kitchen, I was acutely aware of him following, behind me. The house felt smaller with just the two of us, every sound amplified. The gentle patter of rain against windows, the soft creak of floorboards, the almost imperceptible sound of our breathing. I began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, trying to focus on the simple task of preparing dinner. But I could feel David's eyes on me, watching as I moved around the kitchen that had once been my domain as a teenager. "You've grown up so much," he said suddenly, his voice soft and contemplative. I turned to look at him, ingredient-laden hands frozen mid-motion. "What do you mean?" "When your mother and I first got together, you were still in college, still my stepdaughter's age, you know? But now..." He trailed off, shaking his head as if trying to clear unwanted thoughts. The air between us felt charged, like the moments before lightning strikes. I turned back to the counter, my hands slightly trembling as I began chopping vegetables. "Now what?" I asked, not sure if I really wanted to hear the answer. "Now you're a woman," he said simply. "A beautiful, intelligent woman who..." He stopped himself, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air between us like a confession half-spoken. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows with increasing fury. Inside, the kitchen felt like a cocoon, insulated from the world and its rules and expectations. "David," I said, not turning around, "we should probably..." "Should probably what?" His voice was closer now. I could feel him standing just behind me, close enough that the warmth of his body seemed to radiate through the small space between us. I turned slowly, and found myself looking up into eyes that held a mixture of conflict and something I couldn't quite name, something that made my breath catch in my throat. "This is complicated," I whispered. "I know," he replied, his voice barely audible above the storm. "God, Sarah!" I know how complicated this is. Thunder crashed outside, and in that moment of sound and fury, something shifted between us. The careful distance we'd always maintained, the polite stepfather-stepdaughter dynamic, all of it seemed to dissolve like mist. He reached out, not quite touching me, his hand hovering near my face as if he was afraid that actually making contact would cross a line neither of us could uncross. "I shouldn't be thinking the things I'm thinking," he said, his voice rough with emotion. My heart was racing now, pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. Every rational part of my mind was screaming warnings, reminding me of all the reasons this was impossible, forbidden, wrong. But there was another part, a part I'd buried deep for 3 years, that was whispering something entirely different. What kind of things? I heard myself ask, my voice sounding strange and breathless. Instead of answering, he let his hand drop, stepping back as if my very presence was burning him. "We should eat," he said abruptly, but his eyes never left mine. "Before the food gets cold," but neither of us moved. We stood there in the warm glow of the kitchen lights, the storm raging outside, both of us knowing that something fundamental had just shifted. Some invisible boundary had been tested, and although we hadn't crossed it, we both now knew how fragile it really was. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness broken only by the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. "Power's out," David said unnecessarily, his voice sounding strange in the darkness. "I can see that," I replied, trying to inject some normalcy into my voice. But in the darkness, with the storm surrounding us and no escape from the electricity crackling between us, I realized that this night was far from over. And somewhere in the depths of my heart, in a place I barely dared acknowledge, I wasn't sure I wanted it to end. Lightning flashed again, illuminating David's face for just a moment, and in that brief instant of visibility, I saw something in his expression that made my knees weak and my carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. This was just the beginning. The darkness seemed to amplify everything, every sound, every breath, every unspoken word hanging between us. I could hear David moving carefully through the kitchen, the soft shuffle of his feet against the tile floor. "There should be candles in the drawer by the sink," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet house. "Found them," he replied, and moments later the warm glow of candlelight began to chase away the shadows. But somehow, the flickering light made everything feel more intimate, not less. The dancing flames cast our shadows on the walls, creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere that seemed to exist outside of normal reality, outside of the rules that governed our everyday lives. I busied myself with finishing the meal preparation, trying to ignore how aware I was of every movement David made. The way he set the candles around the kitchen with careful precision. The way the light played across his features. The way he kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. "Sarah," he said suddenly, and something in his tone made me turn. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life? Like you were following a script that someone else wrote for you?" The question caught me off guard. It was so personal, so unexpected. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the counter, candlelight flickering across his face. "I mean, when I married your mother, I thought I knew what I wanted. Stability, companionship, a ready-made family. But sometimes I wonder if I was just trying to fit into what I thought I should want, rather than what I actually—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "What you actually what?" I pressed, stepping closer without realizing it. "What I actually felt," he finished quietly. "What I actually desired." The word desired seemed to echo in the small space between us, loaded with meaning that neither of us dared to fully acknowledge. "I know the feeling," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life being the good daughter, the responsible one. Following all the rules, staying inside all the boundaries, but sometimes what? Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I just let go. If I stopped being afraid of what other people would think and just followed my heart." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the kitchen in stark white light for just a moment, before plunging us back into the warm glow of candles. In that brief instant, I saw something raw and vulnerable in David's eyes. "Your heart," he repeated. "And what does your heart tell you, Sarah?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I could feel my pulse racing, could hear the blood rushing in my ears. This was dangerous territory, and we both knew it. But the storm outside seemed to have created its own world, separate from consequence and judgment. "My heart tells me," I began slowly, "that some things can't be helped. That some feelings are bigger than the boundaries we try to put around them." David's breath caught audibly. "Sarah." "I know it's wrong," I continued, the words spilling out of me like water through a broken dam. "I know it's complicated and impossible and that there's no future in it, but that doesn't make it any less real." The distance between us seemed to shrink, without either of us consciously moving. I could smell his cologne, could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest. "Do you know," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "how many nights I've lain awake, thinking about conversations like this? About what it would be like to just be honest?" "Honest about what?" "About the fact that when you walk into a room, everything else fades away. About the fact that I find myself looking for excuses to be near you. About the fact that you're the most beautiful, intelligent, captivating woman I've ever met, and it's killing me that I can't." He stopped himself, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "Can't what?" I whispered. Instead of answering, he reached out and touched my face, his thumb gently tracing my cheek. The contact sent electricity through my entire body. "I can't touch you the way I want to," he said softly. "I can't tell you how I really feel. I can't cross that line no matter how much I want to." But even as he spoke, his hand remained on my face, his thumb now tracing the outline of my lips with feather-light touches that made me dizzy with longing. "David," I breathed, my hands somehow finding their way to his chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart beneath my palms. "We can't," he said, but he didn't move away. If anything, he seemed to lean closer. "I know," I replied, but my body was betraying my words, swaying toward him like a flower drawn to sunlight. The candles flickered around us, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, rain beating against the windows like urgent fingers demanding entry. "One kiss," he whispered, so quietly I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Just one, and then we'll pretend this never happened." My rational mind screamed warnings, but my heart was pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. This was the edge of the cliff, the point of no return. "Just one," I whispered back, tilting my face up toward his. He leaned down slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to be the responsible one, to maintain the boundaries that had kept us safely apart for 3 years, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I found myself rising on my toes to meet him halfway. Our lips were perhaps an inch apart when the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway shattered the moment like glass. We sprang apart as if we'd been burned, both breathing heavily, both staring at each other with wide, shocked eyes. "Sarah? David? Are you two all right in there?" My mother's voice called from the front door, keys jingling as she struggled with the lock. "The power's out," David called back, his voice remarkably steady considering that his hands were shaking. "We're fine." I pressed my back against the kitchen counter, my legs suddenly unsteady. What had we almost done? What line had we almost crossed? "I thought I'd better come back." My mother's voice grew closer as she made her way through the dark house toward the kitchen. "The storm knocked out power lines all along the highway. Aunt Marie insisted I shouldn't try to drive back in the morning." She appeared in the kitchen doorway, flashlight in hand, completely oblivious to the charged atmosphere that had filled the room just moments before. "Oh, good. You have candles," she said, looking between David and me with no apparent suspicion. "I hope Sarah's been taking good care of you, honey." "She has," David replied, and I could hear something beneath his words that made my cheeks burn. "Very good care." My mother smiled and kissed his cheek, a simple gesture that felt like a physical blow to my chest. The reality of the situation crashed over me like cold water, This was my mother's husband. The man I had almost kissed was married to my mother. I should go, I said abruptly, grabbing my purse from the counter. But sweetheart, the storm, my mother began. I'll be fine, I said, not daring to look at David. I need to get home. I practically ran from the kitchen, leaving behind the candles and the half-prepared meal and the moment that had almost changed everything. But as I reached the front door, I heard David's voice behind me. Sarah. I turned, and in the dim light I could see the conflict written across his face, the same turmoil that was tearing through my own heart. This isn't over, he said quietly, so quietly that only I could hear. And as I stepped out into the storm, rain immediately soaking through my clothes, I knew he was right. Whatever had started tonight, whatever boundary we had almost crossed, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The drive home was a blur of rain and windshield wipers, and the memory of his touch on my face. But it wasn't until I was safely inside my own apartment that I allowed myself to think about what had almost happened. And in the darkness of my own bedroom, I found myself wondering, what would have happened if my mother hadn't come home? What would that kiss have led to? And most terrifying of all, did I want to find out? Part 3. The Weight of Secrets. 3 days passed like a lifetime. 3 days of replaying every moment, every word, every almost touch in my mind until I thought I might lose my sanity. I threw myself into work, took longer routes to avoid driving past their house, and screened every phone call, terrified it might be him. But on Wednesday evening, my carefully constructed avoidance came crashing down. Sarah, honey, could you come over for dinner tomorrow? My mother's voice through the phone sounded so normal, so blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. David's been asking about you. He said you left so quickly the other night. My stomach dropped. I'm pretty busy this week, Mom. Nonsense, you work too hard. Besides, I'm making your favorite, that lasagna recipe from Grandma Rose. Please? It's been too long since we had a proper family dinner. Family. The word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. What kind of daughter was I, harboring these feelings? What kind of person had I become? Okay, I heard myself saying, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. What time? 7. And Sarah? Wear something nice, David mentioned. He has something special to discuss with both of us. After hanging up, I sat in my apartment staring at the phone, my mind racing. What could he possibly have to discuss? Had he decided to confess everything to my mother? The thought made me feel sick and terrified, and if I was honest with myself, oddly disappointed. Thursday crawled by with excruciating slowness. I changed clothes 3 times, settling finally on a simple blue dress that I told myself was appropriate for a family dinner, and definitely not chosen because David had once complimented me in this color. The house looked exactly the same as it had 4 nights ago, but everything felt different. My mother greeted me at the door with her usual warm hug, chattering about her day, about the repairs needed after the storm, about everything except the undercurrent of tension I was sure must be written all over my face. David's in his study, she said, leading me toward the kitchen. He's been working late all week. I think that presentation for the board has him stressed. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The smell of lasagna filled the house, mingling with the familiar sense of home and creating a surreal normalcy that made everything feel like a dream. David, my mother called. Sarah's here. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, each sound making my heart beat faster. When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, our eyes met for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to send that familiar electricity crackling through the air. Sarah, he said, and I was relieved to hear that. His voice sounded normal, controlled. How have you been? Fine, I replied, proud of how steady I sounded. Busy with work. My mother bustled around the kitchen, completely oblivious to the careful distance David and I maintained, the way we both seemed to make sure we never moved too close to each other. Dinner was a masterclass in acting normal. We discussed work, the weather, local news, all while I was acutely aware of every glance, every accidental brush of fingers when passing dishes, every loaded silence that my mother seemed to interpret as comfortable family quiet. "So," my mother said as she served dessert, "David mentioned he had something to discuss with us?" I felt my stomach clench, but David's expression remained perfectly composed. "Actually, yes," he said, reaching across the table to take my mother's hand. The gesture was so simple, so natural, and it hit me like a physical blow. "I've been thinking about taking early retirement." My mother's face lit up. "Really? David, that's wonderful. We could travel, spend more time together." As she continued talking excitedly about their potential plans, I found myself studying David's face. He was smiling, nodding at appropriate moments, playing the part of the devoted husband perfectly. But something in his eyes, some subtle tension around his mouth, told a different story. "What brought this on?" I asked, surprising myself by speaking up. His eyes met mine across the table. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," he said carefully. "About what's really important, about making sure I don't waste any more time on things that don't bring meaning to my life." There was something in the way he said it, some emphasis that made me wonder if he was talking about more than just his job. "That's so romantic," my mother sighed, squeezing his hand. "A new chapter for both of us." After dinner, my mother excused herself to take a phone call from my aunt, leaving David and me alone in the kitchen for the first time since that night. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we weren't saying. "So," I said finally, focusing intently on drying a plate, early retirement. "It seems like the right time," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "And the real reason?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When I finally looked up, he was staring at me with an expression that made my knees weak. "You know the real reason," he said quietly. "David." "I can't do this anymore, Sarah." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I can't sit across from you at dinner and pretend I don't feel what I feel. I can't watch you laugh and smile and pretend that it doesn't tear me apart, that I can't be the one making you happy." "Stop," I whispered, glancing toward the hallway where we could hear my mother's voice. "I think about you constantly," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "I dream about you. I imagine conversations we'll never have. Imagine touching you in ways that I never can. It's driving me insane." "This is impossible," I said, my voice shaking. "You know that, right? There's no scenario where this works out." "I know." He moved closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "That's why I'm leaving." The words hit me like a slap. "What?" "Not just retiring, leaving. I'm going to tell your mother that I got a job offer in Seattle, that it's too good to pass up." "You're going to lie to her?" "I'm going to save all three of us from destroying our lives over something that can never be." His hand lifted as if he was going to touch my face, then dropped back to his side. "Because if I stay, Sarah, if I have to keep pretending that you're just my stepdaughter, if I have to keep acting like I don't want you more than I've ever wanted anything in my life, David, you can't just—" "I'll lose control," he finished, his voice rough with emotion. "One day I'll stop caring about consequences and I'll touch you the way I've been dreaming about. I'll kiss you the way I should have kissed you during the storm. And then what? We destroy your mother's happiness? We tear apart this family? We live with that guilt for the rest of our lives?" Tears were burning my eyes, but I couldn't seem to look away from his face. "So you're just going to disappear?" I whispered. "It's better this way." "Better for who?" Before he could answer, my mother's voice drifted from the hallway. "I'll be right there, just finishing up with Marie." David stepped back, the distance between us suddenly feeling like an ocean. "When?" I asked. "I'm telling her tonight, after you leave." The finality of it hit me like a wave. This was it. This was goodbye to whatever impossible thing had been growing between us. Goodbye to the tension and the longing and the sweet torture of being near him. Goodbye to the most intense feeling I'd ever experienced in my life. "Sarah," he said, and something in his voice made me look up. "If things were different, if we had met some other way, some other time—" "But we didn't," I said, my voice breaking slightly. We met this way, at this time, and that's the reality we have to live with. He nodded, but the pain in his eyes was almost too much to bear. My mother's footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing closer. I should go, I said quickly, grabbing my purse. Sarah, wait. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't stand there and pretend everything was normal when my world was falling apart. I couldn't kiss my mother goodbye and make small talk when the man I had fallen in love with. And yes, I could finally admit it to myself. I was in love with him, was about to walk out of my life forever. I practically ran to my car, my mother's confused calls following me into the night. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of David in my rearview mirror, standing in the doorway, watching me leave. And I realized that some boundaries once tested can never be rebuilt. Some feelings, once acknowledged, can never be forgotten. Some love, even impossible love, leaves marks on your soul that time can never fully erase. But as I drove through the night, tears streaming down my face, I couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't over yet. That somehow, some way, the universe wasn't finished with us. I just had no idea how right I was. 2 weeks later, my phone rang at midnight. Sarah. David's voice was raw, desperate. She knows. My blood turned to ice. What? Your mother found? The resignation letter I never sent. The real one. The one that mentioned you. I could hear my mother crying in the background, her sobs cutting through my heart like glass. She's asking me to choose, he whispered. Her or you. David, you can't. I already chose, he interrupted, his voice breaking. I chose you the moment I first saw you as more than just my stepdaughter. I've been choosing you every day since. The line went quiet except for my mother's distant weeping. Come over, he said finally. It's time we stopped running from this. My hands were shaking as I reached for my car keys, knowing that whatever happened next would change all of our lives forever. Some boundaries, once shattered, can never be rebuilt.